I don't know about you, but one of the things that's been on my mind a lot recently is the challenges and the impacts in the housing market of recent times, and indeed how the banks, surveyors and valuers are coping with what is a changing market. So I'm really pleased to be joined today by Simon White, who is MD of LCSV, who are major London surveyors, and we're going to chat through some of how he's been finding things and how the teams are actually reaching their values. So Simon, firstly, very much appreciate your time. Thank you very much. It is a delicate time. How have you been finding things?
We have been encouragingly busy. Every estate agent that we speak to is very, very busy. They've got full days, Saturdays and Sundays. So we've been encouragingly very, very busy.
Yeah.
But I think this is only temporary. I think this is as a result of the pent-up demand, obviously, during the lockdown period. And a lot of this is sales which were progressing before March the 23rd are now coming to fruition. So I think we've got a 3-month period when we're going to be very, very busy.
Yeah.
And I think the economic downturn will kick in. I think there are millions on furlough, and if you've been on furlough for 2 or 3 months, and you're worried about your job, you're not going to take on any extra borrowing. So I think we've got a good 2 or 3 months, and then I do think we are going to face the market falling off a bit due to the economic downturn, the Armageddon which might ensue.
Yes, as you say, there's lots of temporary measures in place to support the economy and to support the housing market, which is terrific. But they do have a time limit. They do run out, and I guess it's only at that point that we'll be able to see the kind of realities of what's happened.
I've been asked constantly over the past 6 or 7 weeks, how has the market reacted? Can we validate valuations, which we did in September and November and December? And the answer is no, because by definition, nobody can know how the market has reacted until we are back to some sort of normality, which we're nowhere near at the moment.
But you are able to do physical valuations now, are you?
We are. All the banks, all the lenders have now returned to physical valuations. On occasions, we do a desktop, but it'll always be followed up by a physical inspection. During the lockdown, there's been desktops and AVMs. I have to say, we don't greatly support AVMs because being a valuation company, that would be like turkeys voting for Christmas. I think
was that presumably lots of remortgages, was it, during the lockdown?
Well, there wasn't a great deal of instruction work coming through during the lockdown period, but any that there was either remortgages or it was banks just doing the normal 3-year check on their book. Private banks do, but there was no purchase work at all. No. I mean, AVMs do have their place, but AVMs will never be a permanent function of the central London market, which is where we mainly practice, for a variety of reasons. One, the numbers are too big. No private bank is ever going to lend £5 million in an AVM. And secondly, there are just too many variables. You will know, Phil, the difference between a 10 or a 20-year lease and a 90-year lease.
Yes.
Indeed, flats, if I think where our office is in lovely Mayfair, the majority of the housing stock within 1.5 miles of our office is all flats in blocks. Now, it makes a hell of a difference if there's no lift in the block. The difference between a first floor flat and a fifth floor flat is immense if there's no lift. Now, AVMs don't really take that into consideration. Also, lease details. You can have 2 blocks which are fairly similar. One may have high service charges, one might have low service charges. So I don't think AVMs will ever have a place in central London for those reasons.
I mean, it's a complicated thing to do to value accurately at the best of times, but in a changing world and one that is in fact changing rapidly, it becomes that much harder.
It does.
How have you had to adapt in terms of sort of protocol and safety when your guys are out valuing?
Well, yes, good question. We've got very, very strict guidelines. All the surveyors take masks and gloves. We try to do everything by our own transport and not public transport. When we make the appointment, we say to the vendors or to the applicants, whatever, can you make sure that the windows are open and that you vacate the premises if you possibly can. And we just do it as much as we possibly can. And that's the way we've adapted. We've adapted by doing this, by having meetings via Zoom. Up until I thought a Zoom was a nice lolly. I didn't know Zoom was
It seems to me the great challenge is that you haven't got recent comparable data from sales over the last few months in order to rely on for your values, or even give you a kind of peg to work from. So that's how are you coping with that?
Well, I've got quite a robust view on this, and as you can imagine, I've been asked this a number of times. Look, we can only value on the evidence that we have got, and all the sales evidence is all pre the lockdown. There have been no completion since the market reopened, no real body of completion. So we have to base our valuations on the body of evidence that we've got, and that might be 6, 7, 8, 9 months old. But that's the best evidence we've got. That's the best evidence we've got. Now the RICS have very kindly given us 2 paragraphs which go into all our reports, and they talk about material uncertainty and having to keep the valuation under review. So when we put together our valuation based on the best comparable evidence we've got, with the RICS paragraphs in, we are sufficiently putting the lender on notice of the fact that the comparable evidence is before the lockdown period. But then what is important is, all we can do, Phil, is provide the valuation advice. It's then down to the lender's underwriters.
Okay.
They make the decision as to how much to lend, not us. Because the underwriters, all the underwriters watch news at 10, they all listen to LBC, they all read the Metro, they all read the Evening Standard. They're just as aware of the market and the financial situation that we are. But the one thing that the underwriters have got that we haven't is knowledge about the applicant. They know how much the applicant earns, they know how much the applicant gets in dividends, in salary and bonus. So they are far better placed to make the lending decision. We give them the valuation based on all the evidence that we possibly can. Then it's down to the underwriters to make the decision.
And there's been quite a lot in the press about the reduction in the numbers of mortgage products. Do you think that is to do with the underwriters kind of forecasting or predicting what might happen?
Well, look, let me explain how we work. We are primarily in central London. Our client base, our predominant client base, is private banks. So we are slightly different than other surveyors who would value for high street lenders. We do a little bit for high street lenders, but we don't do a lot. So our main banks are the niche private banks. Now they don't have products at all, because private banks don't lend on buildings. They don't lend on flats. They don't lend on houses. They lend on people.
Yeah.
And they will therefore bespoke a product specifically to the lender. So their products haven't changed. I think in terms of the high street banks, I think their products, the products are essentially the same. But what I think will have changed is how they credit score them, because there will now be far more inquiries of employers to make sure the company is going to be around in 6 months, 9 months' time, and things such as bonuses and guaranteed overtime and things like that, whereas they may have been taken on board wholesale in years gone by. I don't think that will be the case now. So I think it will be more difficult to get high LTV mortgages, and certainly the criteria will have stiffened up,
I think that's really one to watch, because it's a bit of a hot debate, because people are very much asking for the 90% loan to values, the smaller deposits, but the banks have a duty to kind of protect themselves as well. Otherwise, we get back to another financial crisis. We're
going to go back to 1991 and all the crises have been since then. I'm old enough to remember them all. You probably are. Yeah.
Can we just talk about the London market? I know your company is focused on London. But London is such a global city, and therefore attracts investment from across the world. And therefore it is dependent on the global economy, it seems to me, rather than particularly the national economy. I'm presuming that there's very little overseas investment coming in. The other thing that's on my mind is what happens in the London market tends to reverberate out and is felt across the rest of the country, because it is such a driving force. Would you agree with that?
The truth is, British people can't afford to live in prime central London, is the truth of the matter.
Which is a crying shame, but there we are. Not much we can do about it.
Certainly up until the end of last year, over the past 3 years, I think the statistic is something where certainly over 60% of buyers in prime central London have been foreign nationals. Now, you would say, wouldn't you, that at the moment the appetite to buy in central London from foreign nationals should be great, because sterling is weak and is likely to remain weak. Interest rates are low, and London, has a unique appeal. There's only one place in the world which has a similar appeal, and that's Manhattan Island in New York, because in London, generally speaking, you don't get tsunamis. Generally speaking, you don't get armies walking down the street. You don't get fires. You don't get natural disasters. The London market is a very, very safe place to invest. But we've got Brexit round the corner. People think that Brexit is done and dusted. It's not. Brexit has only been off the agenda recently because of you know what. We have the possibility of there being a no-deal Brexit, and that will again come back. And that will deter, and still does deter, foreign buyers. And other foreign buyers are worried at the moment because they're worried about a second spike and quarantine. So although central London market is very attractive for overseas buyers, there's not a whole lot of them right now.
Where would you think things might be in terms of London values in a year's time or 18 months' time?
As I said previously, I think we've got a 2 or 3 month honeymoon period, if I can call it a honeymoon period.
Yeah.
I think after that, I think the possible financial Armageddon, which we might be facing, is going to kick in. Companies going out of business, people losing their job. However, I remain reasonably bullish. I think after this 2 or 3 months, the market will maybe drop by 7.5% is my guess. But in a year's time, 15 months, I think we'll be back to where we were at the beginning of this year. And we've got to remember what we've gone through. I'm almost 63, and I think to myself, my God, I've seen everything. And I had. Up until March the 23rd, I've seen everything. There is nothing I've not seen or dealt with in all my years until this.
Yes.
And before all this, we were in a very, very strong position.
Yeah.
We got the election result the industry wanted.
Yeah.
People thought that Brexit was done and dusted and out of the way, although we all know it isn't. And suddenly we were faced with a tsunami of work, and then just stopped.
But what's very different this time, we're looking down the barrel, in my opinion, of a global recession rather than a country's recession. Yeah, I know you've been in that market for 40 years, so you've seen plenty of blips in our economy, but not in the global economy.
No, we did have we've had various banking crises over the years. I think you are right. I think this is going to probably be the biggest readjustment to market conditions globally that there's ever been, because we've never faced anything like this at all. And you've got to applaud Rishi Sunak in many ways, because I think the initiative with the stamp duty, it will kickstart things.
Yeah. And
it's good to see an initiative which benefits London more than anywhere else, because usually it's the other way around. It's people in the southeast that are paying, and the people in the northeast aren't. But with this threshold rising to 500,000 up until March, the average price of a property in London is £500,000, and that's Greater London. The average price in prime central London will be a lot more than that, but the average price in London is £500,000. So every purchase in London is going to benefit 100% stamp duty threshold.
Yeah.
The cynic in me says that there will be agents out there rubbing their hands, thinking they can now raise asking prices, and you then get the question: well, what's going to happen in a few months' time when we reach the end of the war? Because we'll get to the end of March, and what happens after that?
Yes, if that is a cliff edge at the end of March, that's not going to be pretty.
It's a bit of a curious egg.
I'd hope they'll stagger out the end of the stamp duty holiday, because if there is a cliff edge, things will cluster up, and I think that'll get ugly.
There's been demand on various chancellors for a long, long time to change and reorganise stamp duty regulations. It's taken a long time. It's taken a global pandemic for this to happen. Yes. So although I share your wishes, I don't think it'll happen.
What I'm taking from what you've talked about is we're in a bit of a kind of hiatus at the moment, bit of a holiday period before things bite. Would you buy now or would you sell now?
Look, if I had to sell and move to my flat in Spain, which I do actually have, and I don't go there often enough, not been there for months for obvious reasons. I think now, if you wanted to sell, put your property on the market right now. Yeah, I would, absolutely right now, because you could get. Look, I have been amazed at the number of building survey and home buyer instructions we have had, and how many of our valuations are to purchase properties, and a really strong percentage of those have been at above the guide price. And you speak to the agent says, yeah, we had it on for £1.25 million.
Yeah.
It's on the offer at 1.4, and we've got two backup offers at 1.4. Yeah, that's happened constantly.
So your surveyors can only value with the information that they have in the market at that time on that day. But actually what you're saying is it's the underwriters in the banks who will assess the levels of risk and whether and what they're prepared to lend. Underwriting
is a very easy job to do. It's as easy as falling off a log in a rising market, because what do you have to do? In an unsteady market, it's not such an easy job. And at the end, look, we give them the valuation. We don't tell them what to lend. The underwriter knows how much the applicant has got. He knows his financial liquidity. He knows his financial position. And if they overextend and lend them too much, then, you know, you could argue that that's irresponsible lending. So underwriting.
As a firm of surveyors, where do you stand? If you say something's worth X today in the market today, based on the information you have, which you recognise isn't the best quality information because it's quite historic, where do you stand if the banks lend the money and in a month's time that house is worth less than they've lent? Do they come back to you? It's a really complicated one.
Well, in theory, yes, they could, which is why we have a PI of £15 million. In theory, that would happen, but any action would fail if we could prove that at the day we did the valuation, our valuation was backed up with the best, most robust comparables that we could find. If we make a mistake, we make a mistake. But so long as our valuation is based on the best comparable evidence that we can find, then we can't be called to book. Look,
but you also understand that the best comparable evidence that you can find isn't that great, but simply because we haven't had a market for a few months.
That's true.
You've got the best that you can get, but
now you seem to be suggesting to me, should we automatically drop our values by 5 to 10% to predict the market going down?
Your job isn't to predict, is it?
Our job is not to predict. No. Now, Savills and Knight Frank and other research departments have come out and they have said that the drop in the market this year is going to be somewhere around 5, 7.5%, 10%, and I broadly agree with them. If we were to go along and do the valuations which I've talked about, where the property's on the market at 1.25, it's sold at 1.4, and there are two backup offers at 1.4, can you honestly turn around and say, well, do you know what? You've offered 1.4. There are two other backup offers from people who are ready and willing to proceed at 1.4. But do you know what? We're going to ignore all that. We're going to value it at 1.2. There we go.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Yeah.
You can't do it, can you? You can't do it. Because who does that help? Who does that help? So it's a balancing act. But I'm pleased to say that our core clients, the private banks, won't lend more than 50%, 60% at the most. And they are, not only are they private banks, they're wealth managers, and they generally don't do dry lending. So if you wanted to lend through a private bank, Phil, you'd have to have a few million with the bank that they're managing as well. So they know your financial situation. So it's unlikely that anything is going to go wrong, which is slightly different than how it works with the high street. Well, it's not slightly different.
Yes.
It's slightly different.
As you said earlier, the private banks are lending on the person and their assets and all of that, sort of more than the property values.
Private banks don't lend on buildings, they lend on people.
Yeah. Simon, many, many thanks. Hugely appreciated. Watch this space. It's going to be interesting.